What's going on, everyone? It's your boy Savvy. Welcome back to the Savvy Show. And in today's episode, it might look like an SCP versus battle with Shy Guy and the Plague Doctor. However, it doesn't look like that's the case after reading the title, because this is going to be about SCP-049, Plague Doctor, curing SCP-096, Shy Guy, of his pestilence. So it seems like this is going to be an attempt of him curing him of, his disease. Let's see how this will come about. It's really cool because we saw like an somewhat origin story of the Shy Guy a few episodes back. But I'm going to be interested to see if the Plague Doctor could succeed with curing the Shy Guy. This is going to be interesting. So if you guys are excited for this reaction, let me know by smashing that like button. And also let me know what you think in the comment section below. I would love to hear what your guys' first impressions about it. If you thought he could cure him or if he couldn't cure him. Because today we're going to find out. So with all out of the way, remember smash that sub button as well too. Join the family if you're not already part of the family. Make content like this all the time so you'll never miss a dose of SCP heat. And also remember to hit that noti bell so you don't miss an upload. And now, without any further ado, let's get this show started. Alrighty, SCP-049 cures SCP-096 of the Pestilence. Let's go.
As you walk down the halls of the SCP Foundation Site-19, peeking in the various windows at the anomalies contained there, you might catch a glimpse of a dark figure bent over a table, tinkering away like an artisan in his workshop. A vintage black apothecary bag sits next to him, open, and if you stop and watch for a while, you'll see him pull all manner of tools out of it. Impossibly large tools, things that shouldn't fit in such a small bag. A bone saw, an IV stand, jars of fluorescent liquids, and needles the length of your forearm. You shouldn't be surprised. This is a place for impossible things, after all.
Oh, is he prepping for the surgery there for Shy Guy?
Still, it's a curious sight. The shadowy man working so diligently, so quietly, focused singularly on his craft, whatever that might be. Only one thing could distract him from his efforts. You. He feels your gaze on him, and he looks up, dark eyes glittering from behind a beaked ceramic mask. He reminds you of an illustration you once saw in a book about the Black Death, the gear the Plague Doctors wore while treating patients on their deathbeds.
He is called the Plague Doctor.
Hello. He greets you in a friendly, heavily accented voice. His eyes crinkle beneath the mask, and if you could see his mouth, you know he'd be smiling. How are you today, dear fellow? Are you feeling quite well?
Yep.
He takes a step toward the window,
so please don't
stretching out one gloved hand, and you suddenly realize that you can't see where the mask ends and his skin begins. It's not a mask, but a part of his face. This is no ordinary man. Do you require help? I can examine you, he offers, palm pressed flat against the glass. A chill runs up your spine, and you realize that you should definitely not take him up on his offer.
Just say you probably don't take my insurance and skedaddle.
No matter how friendly he seems, how good his intentions may be, you wouldn't want to let the Plague Doctor treat you. He sat in his containment cell, fidgeting with his favorite scalpel. He dragged it over the surface of his work table, back and forth, listening to the sound it made. They had tried to confiscate his table, his tools. The guards had quickly learned that he had more of them in his bag.
You really going to take a table from him? Okay, I get the bag, but bro, it's a table. Come on. And y'all the ones that probably put him in this room. He ain't bring the table in the room.
They tried to take away his bag from him, but, well, that didn't go over too well for anyone involved. So he was allowed to keep it, to fashion himself a makeshift laboratory in his lonely little cell. There was a time where they had given him test subjects, fresh corpses from the morgue for him to dissect and research. There was a time when the doctors here would come to speak with him, talking of cryptobiology and the pestilence he had dedicated himself to fighting. Those days were long gone. He had hidden away pieces of the corpses, tissue samples in jars of formaldehyde he could pull out when the monotony became too much.
This guy's just big chilling at the Foundation, bro. That's all I see him doing when he's always here.
Days of fresh materials, of enlightened discourse with other men and women of science, were over. How he missed those days. The chance to work with others as he once had. What had he done wrong? All he did was treat the sick. Sure, they didn't always understand their illness, didn't want to receive their medicine, but that wasn't a choice for the patient to make. That should have been up to the physician. Perhaps they didn't trust his expertise, didn't see how his work served the greater good. Like those who watched Jonas Salk invent the polio vaccine. or Louis Pasteur rid milk of bacteria. They were confused by the advanced scientific practices and feared that which they did not understand. He could forgive them for their ignorance. He was magnanimous that way. If only they would let him out of this infernal room, he could prove his work's worth to them. He could cure them all, begin a new era of wellness and peace worldwide.
I mean, you still got to get the permission first. Even if you think you're doing what's just and you cure them of the pestilence, disease, per se, you still have to let them say, okay, do it on me. You can't just do it to random people. Come on now.
He didn't exactly sleep, but when he rested on his little cot in the corner of the room, he dreamed of that future, of a world healed by his touch. A knock at the door stirred him from his reverie. Someone was at the door of his containment cell. He glanced at the little window and saw a guard there with a tray of food. He greeted the man with an enthusiastic wave. Sustenance. He didn't require the food for survival, of course, but it helped his mind work more efficiently. It reminded him of a time before these fluorescent lights and these same four walls, of crusty bread with fresh butter by the banks of the Seine. A little slot opened in the door, and the tray was shoved through. There was bread, just as he hoped, a small dish of butter, a pot of jam, and a cup of tea still steaming. Okay. He picked up the cup at first, taking a deep breath. An herbal blend with fresh lavender. Lovely. He couldn't see the guards.
I want to see how he's going to drink that if that's his face, the mask.
Anymore, but he called out to him just the same. Thank you for the libations. He still had his manners after all, even in confinement. He wished he could have gotten a better look at the man, seen the pallor of his complexion, a tremor in his hand. He thought he had spotted sweat beading on his forehead. Could he be ill? The case required further examination to be certain. He sighed, clutching the cup of tea tighter in frustration. Why wouldn't they just let him work? Why must they scream at the sight of his efforts, flee from his instruments? It didn't seem fair.
I wish they could make like a video or someone just goes into depth seeing how things are from the plague doctor's perspective. Like, is he seeing something else that we're not seeing after he cures someone? Because we just see them die, but does he see something else?
Still, the pursuit of science rarely was a glamorous one. He had learned as much over the centuries. One day, though, history would look back on him kindly. Of this, he could be certain. He was just settling in and beginning to spread butter across the admittedly stale bread when a horrible sound shook him to attention. He had heard the noise before, though he had never seen its source. It was an ear-splitting scream, a wail of pure agony, like the sound of a wounded wild animal. He had heard many, many screams during his life, from patients and those who stood in the way of his work. But until he had been brought into custody of the Foundation, he had never heard a scream quite like this one.
It has to be Shy Guy.
It was pure rage, devastation, and suffering mixed together, wet with tears, and loud enough to rip through human vocal folds. Whatever was crying out, it was no mere man. More screams answered it, and these were very much human. These sounds were more familiar to him. Shrieks of pain, of fear, of desperate but futile attempts to escape. Then the meaty thud of bodies falling to the floor, of torn-off limbs hitting walls and windows, a loud crash, and the sound of something large moving quite quickly through the halls. Scientific curiosity got the better of the doctor, and he found himself moving back to his little window, face pressed to the glass so hard his beak nearly cracked it. He couldn't see much of anything, just guards running down the hall, weapons drawn. He saw one of them fire, heard the gunshot ring out. But what was he firing at? Then he saw it, a pale blur darting past the door. Whatever it was, it didn't so much as flinch when the bullet ricocheted off its skin. A long, thin arm crashed against the door, knocking the doctor backwards into his work table.
So did the doctor, look at him? Did you look at Shy Guy yet?
He steadied himself and climbed back to his feet, taking in the damage done to the door. It was crumpled in on itself, nearly ripped off the hinges, and whatever had plowed into it was already gone. From the sounds of chaos in the distance, it had disappeared around the corner, with the guards following it.
And also, why are the guards in the room? Don't they know by now how Shy Guy operates? Where's the right protocols? I mean, it's just goofy. And why are you shooting it? You should know that doesn't work.
He inspected the ruins of the door to his containment cell. It was useless now, hanging loose and open. Well, that was an invitation he was hardly about to decline. He grabbed his trusty bag, tossed his scalpel back inside, and set off to see what all the commotion was. It was easy enough to follow the trail of blood, stark and vivid red against the white tile floor, and the sound of gunfire, human screams, and that loud, long, painful wail he had heard before. He walked at a leisurely pace, taking his time, until the sound suddenly stopped. He rounded the corner and found a mound of bodies, guards and scientists, beaten and bloodied, almost beyond recognition. It was quiet here, save for one sound, the sound of weeping. There in the corner, huddled over with its face to the wall, was a pale, thin figure, its shoulders heaving with the force of its sobs. This poor soul was clearly in great distress. It was a peculiar sight, hairless and white, extended arms wrapped around itself as it cried.
"Excuse me,"
the doctor cried out to the pitiful creature.
"Are you all right? Do you need assistance?"
It didn't answer. It just continued to cry. Had something so despondent been responsible for this destruction? The dozens of corpses, the smashed-in walls, the crumbled doors and shattered windows. It seemed impossible. Sure, it was large and looked strong, but he had never seen a monster cry before. This couldn't be a dangerous creature. Not when it was so sad. He would help it, but first, he would attend to some of these bodies. He sat his bag on the ground and pulled out several vials of liquid, a set of syringes, and a variety of other surgical tools he might need. Now, after such a long hiatus, he could resume his work in a meaningful way. He couldn't be certain how long he worked, reviving these poor souls and reconstructing their bodies, as the pale creature wept in the corner. The sobbing faded into the background for a while, becoming a kind of white noise as he removed a liver here, placed it in a chest cavity there, poked and prodded, injected and extracted, testing out new methods alongside tried and true cures. One by one, the milky eyes fluttered open, rigor mortis stiff joints creaked into motion, sallow faces looking at his with the vacant gratitude he saw in so many patients over the years. He didn't need to thank him with their words.
God, his eyeball.
The work was its own reward. He expected more guards to arrive, to attempt to contain the situation, but none came, even as the alarm blared overhead. As for the morose creature, it didn't seem to notice his presence at all, not even when he had brought all of the intact corpses back to life.
Oh God.
The patient shuffled around the room aimlessly, waiting for orders of some kind. The doctor tapped one on the shoulder and handed the reborn man a vial of thick, black medicine.
"Give this to the poor fellow in the corner, please."
Why don't you give it to him?
It wasn't much, but it should calm him, provide some relief from his suffering. The corpse nodded, mouth hanging loose and open, an eyeball dangling unseen from the socket. He shuffled over to the strange creature and held out the vial to it. It turned, lifting its head, and as it locked eyes with the cured patient, something shifted in its face. Its mouth opened wide, impossibly wide,
It'll die again.
and it shrieked, that same terrible sound as before. Tears streamed from its colorless eyes, its arms shaking with unbridled rage, as its jaws locked around the patient's head. Like a boa constrictor, in one fluid motion it swallowed the revived man whole, while the doctor watched in shock.
He swallowed him? Damn, he eats humans now? I didn't think he does that.
He had been wrong.
My
This
goodness.
was not an innocent creature caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. This creature, whatever it was deeply sick. He had never seen such an advanced, aggressive case of the pestilence.
All right,
He'd heard rumors, of course, but never encountered it firsthand. As a doctor, he had sworn to do no harm, but in a drastic situation, drastic measures have to be taken.
If anyone needs a cure, it's definitely Shy Guy.
It was well known by himself and the doctors at this foundation that he could cause any and all biological functions in an organism to cease with a single touch. And so he approached the creature, arm outstretched, ready to administer that necessary touch to protect the rest of his patients. As he approached, the creature turned to him, its eyes wide and blank, an endless stream of tears pouring from them, spilling onto the floor.
What's gonna happen?
It shrieked again, mouth stretching wide enough to engulf his entire head, and ran toward him at a breakneck speed.
"I am so sorry you are not well,"
the doctor said simply,
Touch him.
as his hand pressed to the creature's chest. As soon as the tough hide of the doctor's hand, which the uninformed might mistake for gloves, made contact with the unpigmented skin of the beast, its eyes closed, its muscles went slack, and it collapsed to the ground with a mighty thud. The doctor paced around the fallen
He did it?
creature, taking in the sight. Then something strange caught his eye. The creature's chest still rose and fell. Was it his imagination? He checked its pulse and thought it was slow and faint. And though it was slow and faint, it was very much present. The creature was still alive. It had merely been rendered unconscious by his touch, rather than completely deceased. Curious. Very curious indeed, he muttered. Perhaps there were comorbidities present, other infections aside from the pestilence, which rendered the creature unnaturally strong, resilient to the usual courses of treatment. What would cause these abilities? This intense aggression?
The king of the
it
mountain.
Seemed to be brought on whenever someone looked at the entity's face. If only he studied psychology more, the science of the mind and its inner workings. Since he had no experience with therapy, nor was he certain this creature could communicate using language at all, there was only one way to find out more about how this creature's brain worked. He would have to take it apart and see for himself. It was slow work, getting the massive creature back to the doctor's containment cell. He required the help of his cured patients, who grasped it by its massive limbs and dragged the limp body through the halls. Once back in a familiar environment, his work table ready and waiting, the doctor instructed his assistants to place the new patient on the table. It was a bit small, unable to accommodate the creature's distended limbs, but if he attempted to use an official Foundation laboratory, he risked discovery and subsequent interruption. So it would have to suffice. First, he set up an IV stand, filled with a vivid green liquid. It was easy to find a vein. The creature's skin was nearly translucent. Now that he could be certain the creature would not wake during surgery, he could make the first incision.
Sedated him.
Scalpel. He held out a hand, and his favorite surgical blade was placed in it by one of the helpful patients. Thank you. He slid the scalpel along the hairline of the creature, or where the hairline would be if it weren't completely bald. Once the scalp was removed, he set it aside for later, when it could be reattached. He held out his hand again, and again his assistant gave him the proper tool. This, however, was when things got strange. The doctor had always been a deft hand at cutting. He'd once even received tutelage from the great Robert Liston, but no matter how hard he tried to saw, it never left a scratch on the creature's skeleton. Naturally, this was somewhat frustrating. He wanted to study the creature's brain tissue, to get a sense for what was going up there neurologically, and he couldn't do that if it was impossible to saw off the creature's cranial cap. He blunted 2 of his favorite saws while trying. Thankfully, there was still a solution to access the beast's gray matter, a little trick he'd learned while studying the funerary practices of the ancient Egyptians. He produced a long, curved hook from his bag and inserted it up the creature's nasal passage. With some fine maneuvering, he eventually managed to remove the brain. It
Pretty much give him a lobotomy.
was such a terrible shame that he needed to do it piece by piece via the nasal passage, but one makes do. All that was left was to sew the skin of the creature's head back into place.
How are you going to put the brain back, though? That's what I want to know. You can't just shove it back in the nose.
He was mid-stitch when a voice interrupted his careful work, nearly making him drop the needle. Hey, what are you doing?
Come on, get out of here.
To find a guard, aiming a gun at his face.
Excuse me, I am in surgery at the moment. Please do not interrupt.
He admonished the guard, but the man did not listen or lower his weapon. In fact, he shouted something into the radio, code words the doctor didn't recognize. Then he fired a bullet into the skull of the patient standing at his side.
How dare you?
The doctor cried, readying himself to confront the guard. But it was too late. Dozens of other guards were swarming the room and neutralizing his assistants. Some in hazmat suits grabbed his arms and pulled him away from the creature on the operating table, no matter how hard he fought or how loudly he protested. Then, something incredible happened.
Let's see it.
Something wonderful.
Thought they messed up the video.
The creature opened its eyes and sat up. It looked directly at the guard closest to it, and the two saw one another's faces.
Is it cured?
The guard tensed, preparing for the worst. But nothing came.
It's not attacking.
The creature simply stared, placid and quiet. No screaming, no tearing at flesh, no mouth opening wider and wider to swallow the man whole.
What?
I did it!
The doctor shouted, overcome with elation.
I've cured you! Now begins the rest of your happy life.
He watched as the guards led the shockingly calm creature away, back to its containment cell. The doctor's door was repaired. and he was returned to his state of captivity. But he never forgot the patient he helped that day, and how marvelous it felt to do such a good deed. Meanwhile, SCP-096's brain regrew within the hour and caused another massive containment breach, murdering a variety of researchers and guards. But the staff agreed not to tell
So he only cured him because he took out his brain. So pretty much he was like a zombie, I think. He just wasn't able to, like, you know, see the person he's looking at because, like, there's no brain up there. It was just like an empty, hollow head. So yeah, that makes sense. His brain grew back and then he went back to normal. But that's so cool that he kind of cured him for the little time that he was cured, just not having his brain. I mean, it's pretty much, he didn't really do anything crazy with his medicines and stuff. Like, he just took out the brain. So anyone could kind of do that. They just have to keep on doing that repeatedly.
SCP-049 about any of this. Better to just let him have this one. He really seemed like he needed a win. Now go check out SCP-049, the Plague Doctor.
Okay, that's pretty cool. What did you guys think about this? Because I had no idea. I thought he wasn't going to cure him, just off just first impressions of like both these SCPs. But the way that he did, it wasn't really like a cure. I don't even think like, I just feel like he wasn't coherent. He wasn't aware about like anything because he didn't have a brain. So like he still had the abilities, but he was like pretty much like in a coma. You know, like when you're in a coma, you can still, when you wake up, you can still walk and everything. But like once you're in a coma, you can't do nothing. I feel like he was just like in that kind of state of mind, but he was still able to move and like somewhat look at people, but not have anything like register and like clicking up there. So yeah, that was really cool to see, like just a different take on it. But yeah, let me know what you guys thought about it in the comment section below. And if you guys enjoyed the reaction, smash that like button. Let's try to get 100 likes on this one. Also sub to the channel and hit that bell so you don't miss an upload. And now, unfortunately, that concludes today's episode. However, I'll catch you guys on the next one.